bit more difficult. So you may want to make sure and stop and work through some of the stuff, rewind it if you need to, and go over this, because this one I think is a little more difficult than the last section, which I thought was pretty easy. But in this one, we're going to talk about fractions and percents and things, and they talk about, all right, so let's just start. We've got percent proportion, can't spell here, percent proportion. And what we want to make sure we understand is that if we have a fraction like 3 out of 5, this is the part. You know, it is 3 parts of 5, and the bottom part is known as the base. So you have part over the base. A lot of times I will say part over whole, and that's kind of what they're talking about. And we could write this in percents. That would be 60 over 100, and it's the same thing. We've got part over the base in our example there. And symbolically, they're going to write this as A over B, A being the part. Okay, so this is part, B, of course, being the base. And that's going to be our percent, P, over 100, because this is always at 100 when we're talking about percents. And so we're going to use that information as we try to calculate some of these problems as we go through. Let's take a look at the first problem. It says 22 is what percent of 110? And so as they look at this, what they're saying is that since 22 is being compared to 100, they're saying, so we're saying 22 is what part of 110. So we're kind of comparing these two things. So 22 is my part, and 110 is my whole or my base. And so I've got 22 out of 110, and we know that that's always equal to my percent over 100. And so then what I want to do is try to figure out exactly what my percent is. And so I've got a proportion, and once I have a proportion, I've got a pretty good idea of how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to say, I'm going to cross multiply these guys here. So 22 times 100 equals P times 110. And I get 2200 equals 110p if I divide both sides by 110. Okay, that will cancel, and I get p equals over here. Let's see, we can cancel that out. 11 goes into 22 2 times with another 0, so 20. So p equals 20, so my percent is 20%. Now let's go back up and double check this. So we're saying 22 is 20% of 110. Let's write that over here. We're saying 22 is 20% of 110. And, does that make sense? Does it make sense that 20% of 110 could be 22? If 20% of 100 would be 20, so it's a little bit bigger than that. So yeah, that answer makes a lot of sense. So it's always good to go back and check that to see if those things kind of make sense as to how they are. All right, so as we do these, we want to kind of take a look at things. If we're trying to find, in the book on page 217, if you look at this, they show you a couple things. So, there's 3 different types of problems that they're really kind of talking about here. The first one is you're going to try to find the percent. And, you're going to get an example of something like 7 is what percent of 10. And so when you see this, what percent, you know that you're trying to find the percent there. So that's one. You might be trying to find the part. Remember we said it's part over the base. And a problem like that is going to be something like what number being the part here, what number is 70% of 10? And then the last possible problem in here is you're trying to find the base. And that would look something like this. You would say 7 is 70% of what number? And so you can see you've got those three different things. And that's the key. You're going to have to look at what are they asking for? What's the unknown? Where's that what? What? That's going to kind of tell you what you're looking for. So when it says what percent, you're looking for the percent. It says what number, you're looking for one of the numbers. And if it's, the early part is probably the part. And if we're talking about the last part, we're talking about the base on that particular thing. And we'll do some more examples so you can kind of see how those go. So let's take a look at example number 2. It says, what number is 80% of 500? And so the question is, what are we trying to find? Well, we're trying to find what number. We've got our percents. We've got a number here. This looks like it's going to be my base. This is my percent. And so what I'm looking for is the part. So once again, remember it is part over base equals, I shouldn't call that P because we call that A. It is part over base equals percent over 100. And we know the percent and we know the base. And so let's fill those in. So I've got my unknown is A. My base was the 500. The percent was 80 over 100. The toughest part of these problems is always setting them up. And so reading this equation, reading this sentence, and figuring out what they're asking you to do is always a key. Once you get to this part here, it's not so bad anymore. Now this is pretty easy. We're going to say A times 100. A times 100 equals 500 times 80. So 100A equals, let's see, 40 plus the 2 zeros from the 500 and the other 0, so it looks like 40,000. And if we divide both by 100, looks like we can cancel that. We get to cancel 2 zeros there, so A equals 400. And so 80% of 500 is 400. So we'll go back and we kind of take a look. Does this make sense? It says 400. Oops, can't write that up there for some reason. 400 is 80% of 500. Does that make sense? Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds like that problem is very realistic for an answer. All right, so let's look at the third example here. And in this one, it says, use the information at the left to determine how many days the Lewis and Clark expedition spent in Oregon. So it says that the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition spent the winter of 1805-1806 in Oregon. They reported that it rained 94 days. So it rained 94 days, which was about 89%, of their days in Oregon. So of the total, okay, so 94 is 89% of some number. So we can rewrite that. 94 is 89% of what number? So here's my part. Here's my percent. That's what I'm trying to find. That's my base. And so I've got part 94 over my unknown base is going to equal 89 over 100. This one is going to look like probably want to use a calculator to calculate this out when we get done. 94 times 100 equals 89 times B. So 9400 equals 89 9b, divide both sides by 89. And if I punch that into my calculator, it's going to be about 105.6 days. So you could probably say, well, they were probably there 106 days total. And once again, go back and take a look. 94 is 89% of 106. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. It's smaller than what I have. But it's fairly close. So that would certainly be a possibility for what we're going to do. Okay, so on this particular one, there aren't any definite question or examples in there. So what I would like you to do is on page 218, I want you to do problems 4, 6, and 8. If you would do those for practice problems right now. So stop the thing, do questions 4, 6, and 8. Okay, so taking a look at those 4, says 70 is what percent of 280? And so, I'm trying to indicate these all the time. This is my part. Here's the percent. Here's the base. And it's always A. This is A. Part is A. A over B equals P over 100. So part, this one right here. So 70 over base B, 280, equals my unknown P over 100. And solve for P. 70 times 100 equals 28P. Divide both sides by 28. And you probably would punch that into the calculator. You could. And when you get done, you should come out with 25% for the answer for that one. So that's number 4. Number 6 says 150 is 60% of what number? So there's my part, there's my percent, there's my base, the whole, and so 150 part over the base or part over whole over B equals 60 over 100. So 150 times 100, if we cross multiply, B times 60, and so we can now get 15000 equals 60B. Divide both sides by 60, so that cancels. That goes, let's see, 6 goes into 150. 1500, I should say, goes into there 250 times, I guess. So my answer is 250. And does that make sense? Yeah. If we came take a look, 150 is 60% of 250. If this were 50%, that'd be 125. So, yep, that would be a possible answer that we could get here. And our last one, number 8. This is 8. What is 72.5% of 200? And if we do, once again, we put this is my part, or A. This is my percent. This is my base. So I get A over 200 equals 72.5 over 100. A times 100 equals 72.5 times 200. And I think it's going to be easier for me to divide this 100 out earlier. So let's divide that out here. This goes in and I'm left with a 2. So 2 times 72.5 is going to give me 145. Okay, so A, my part would be 145.